20-episode comic strip for the New York Times Magazine back in 2008 is, according to Publishers Weekly in their starred review, a gorgeously staged graphic novella, consistently playful and funny on a formal level. Daniel Clowes is the cartoonist behind the iconic comic book series 8 Ball, which has been collected into the books Ghost World, Ice Haven, David Boring, and more. He is also the Oscar-nominated screenwriter of Ghost World, a New Yorker cover artist, and, most notably, a Strand Tote Bag Artist. Our dear friend, the graphic designer and best-selling writer Chip Kidd, joins Dan as moderator of tonight's event. As editor-at-large for Pantheon, Chip oversaw the publication of Dan's David Boring. Following their discussion, Dan and Chip will take your questions. They will then stick around and sign books, which you can purchase downstairs on your way out of the store. Please join me in welcoming Chip Kidd and Daniel Clowes to the Strand.
Hello.
The other night, Chip and I were in Philadelphia, and very front row, center of the audience was a guy who was asleep the entire time. It was at the free library, so I assume he's just, it's a good place to sleep. But it was sort of disconcerting, so glad you're not asleep. Stay awake. Back to you.
I ended up having dinner with him, but that's something else entirely. Thank you all for coming. We're thrilled that you are here. I am very honored to be here with my friend and colleague Dan Clowes, the brilliant genius cartoonist. And we at Pantheon are so thrilled to have published Mr. Wonderful. And it's, in a shameless sort of Johnny Carson kind of way, I'm pleased to announce that on the New York Times graphic novel bestseller list, it debuted at #1 last week, and it is #1 this week, and it will stay on the list next week. So we know,
It's plummeting downward.
No, really, we're
sinking like a rock.
we're thrilled about it, and we love the book very much. So let's peel back the layers of time.
Yes.
This is the cover of 8 Ball #1.
Right.
And so how did you make the change from Lloyd Llewellyn to this? Like, why did you decide, okay, I want to start 8 Ball?
Well, at the time, I thought I was done. I thought, I had done a comic series that he just referred to called Lloyd Llewellyn that ran 6 issues and was then canceled. And so I thought, I was through. I was going to have to go back to school, and, I was actually thinking of being an insurance salesman. I thought that was a good job. And so I thought, I'll do one more comic, and I'll do just like exactly what I want to do, and just it'll be out there, and I'll have done it, and then I can, look at it on my deathbed and sob. So that's what 8 Ball was. I did this kind of stories that I actually wanted to do, as opposed to Lloyd Llewellyn, which were the stories that my publisher Gary Groth wanted me to do at the time, and it wound up getting published sort of as a sympathy ploy by my old publisher. They sort of felt sorry for me that I had wasted the time to do this entire comic and spent money on paper and ink and all that. So they thought they would publish it, and then it actually wound up selling.
So this was a real turning point for you. This change.
Well, yeah. I mean, I sort of, that was back in the days when, a best-selling comic would sell, 3,000 copies, and it was absolutely unavailable to the general public. I remember, I had a girlfriend once, and her parents asked me, where could I get one of your comics? And I remember I was thinking, you'd have to take 2 buses to a really bad neighborhood, and then you'd have to go in this dank, horrible store filled with men who don't shave and haven't been on a date ever,
and breathe through their mouths.
Yeah, and then in the back of the store there would be a cardboard box with oil stains on it that said adult. And you'd have to go back there and get like on your hands and knees and dig through the box. And there'd be like, unicorn pornography and like, all kinds of stuff my brain doesn't allow me to remember. And there might be like a beat up copy of one of my comics, So it's, so I would just say like, I'm going to school to be an insurance salesman. I don't just do that as a hobby.
All right. Well, speaking of school, this was, to me, a true masterpiece, Art School Confidential. And here we are in New York, and you went to Pratt.
Pratt Institute, yes. Back in, it was back in a different era, Art school is a very different thing now. People are all the time telling me, like, I teach a class in sequential narratives at Mass Art or what, and back in my day, that was not on the curriculum. It was the late 70s, and all my teachers were, they'd been maybe like abstract expressionists, but more likely like conceptual artists in the 70s. So they were doing balloons pinned to a wall and things like that. And it was just a whole different type of art. And I was Joe Cornball, who's like, can you teach me how to do like
actually draw?
Yeah, or not even that, but how to do like inking techniques and how to what are those little dots they use on the old comics? And they just thought I was the biggest goofball in the world. And I can sort of understand. I remember they would say things like, I have friends who do comics and they're all bitter alcoholics who never made any money, and they live with their mother, and they were right, and I, it's hard to argue with them, and yet I used to say, just theoretically, couldn't comics be good? Couldn't you do, there have been good comics. Couldn't you still do good comics? And it's, I don't think so. I don't think it's worth it. Don't try it. And I think back and I think, couldn't one of them have just said, well, yes, theoretically you could do good comics, but it's not, the marketplace is not going to be there for it or something like that.
With no encouragement from your teachers, how did you follow this path and decide that this is what you wanted to do?
Gee, I don't know. I just never had a backup plan, and I wasn't good at any other aspect of, like I could never do a painting that seemed like a good painting. It always seemed like it was like a splash page for Jimmy Olsen or something. It's just like I didn't.
Which sounds pretty great.
Yeah, I couldn't think like a painter, and sculpture was totally unfathomable to me. I still can't think in 3 dimensions at all.
So are you basically self-taught?
I would say so, although this lettering is a good example of something I did learn. We had a guy at Pratt named David Gates, who was not the lead singer of the band Bread, but dates us all as very, very old men. But he literally wrote the book on display lettering and how to do like this kind of fancy lettering, and he was my favorite teacher by far, and I was like this, apple polishing ass kisser student who, every week,
that
brought in my
explains that
assignment.
you're a great designer, and
It wasn't design. It was just lettering. It was literally just this kind of, hand lettering.
well, that's a big part of it.
Yeah. Okay, take it back. That story was completely false.
So, at what point were you able really to make a go of it, just completely making comics and not having to be an insurance salesman?
Pretty much from the beginning, but again, it was a different world. I remember, I started working professionally when I was 23. I did work for Cracked magazine, which,
Were you
Sure.
credited?
No. I had to use a pseudonym because the reason I got work in the first place is I had a roommate who once, we were just living in Brooklyn in an apartment, and he needed a job, and he looked in the want ads in the New York Daily News, and it said, wanted office boy, Cracked magazine. And he thought, hey, I'll do that. And he went and he applied and he came home and he's like, I got the job. I'm the office boy. And then 2 weeks later, he was the editor-in-chief of Cracked magazine. And you know, he owed me for that month's rent. So he's like, here, do some strips for Cracked. And so I did a bunch of comics and signed my name to it. And he brought them in. And the publisher was, you know, he wanted to be a publisher. He had just bought Cracked and he wanted to show that he's in charge and he knows what's going on. So he kind of went through the pile of artwork that the guy brought in. And he said, you know, this guy's good, this guy's good, this guy's no good, this guy's good, this guy's good, this guy's no good. And I was in the no good pile. And so he came home and he's like, you know, I can't use you. And I was like, well, gee, that's not fair. You know, what am I going to do? And he said, just do something under a made-up name. And so my middle name is Gillespie, and my dad wanted to name me Stosh. That was the name he had selected for me that my mom thankfully put the kibosh on. Yes. And so I just, off the top of my head, I was Stosh Gillespie. And I just basically redid the same stories, slightly different, turned them in, and the guy said, yeah, this guy's great, let's use him.
Wow.
So that's all it took. So
there are Stosh Gillespie issues of Cracked out there. Google them now, eBay.
Actually, you know, I've gotten to the point where people come up to me, you know, 35-year-olds who say, like, I grew up reading your work in Cracked.
Really?
Yeah. Horrifying.
Stosh Gillespie. Now you're gonna hate me for asking this, but I have to because there's this.
I already hate you, Chip.
Well, all right. You're gonna hate me even more. There's a rumor that you did a Marvel tryout book.
Well, I didn't do it for Marvel. I bought one of those Marvel tryout books when it came out.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, this will be fun. It was a book Marvel published when 1980, something like that.
How to draw a comic.
And it was printed. No, it wasn't How to Draw a Comic. It was printed on the comic paper that you use, like the Bristol board, and it had penciled pages, and it was like to see how good you could ink these penciled pages.
Oh, okay.
And so Charles Burns famously did a really great one where he inked it with all these freaky faces. And so I wanted to see, like, am I really, like, good enough to do, like, Marvel inking? And I did one panel, and it looked, like, totally retarded. So I just thought, like, you know, I'm not ready for that. And so then I just, like, goofed around and screwed up the whole thing. And
did you send it in to them?
No.
Do you have it?
No, actually, I threw it away, and when I moved, Chris Ware picked it out of the garbage when I moved away from Chicago, so he has it.
Oh, my God.
So, but you're not allowed to publish
I'm
that.
emailing him in about a half an hour.
I have things of his that he doesn't want released to the public.
Well, so do I, but that's,
yeah, no,
that's
I know
a whole other... All right, so Poussey. This was...
I always called it Pussy, but...
Poussey. What really alarmed me about this book was how much you actually did know about true geekdom. And at this point, maybe I'm not surprised.
What are you saying?
Well, I mean, there's a sort of knowledge here in this hilarious book about the real hardcore mainstream comics world, which you were.
You know, it kind of all on this cover. You can see, like, there's these legs off to the side, and there's this guy kind of drawing this girl who's staring at Mr. Poussey, and that would be me sitting next to these guys. Because when I first started in comics, you know, you were in that little cardboard box in the store, and your only other way to get out there and, you know, meet the fans or, you know, sell your work was to go to these comic conventions. And so I used to, you know, force myself to go and just sit there at a table all day with literally nobody coming by, you know, I'd like keep rearranging my stack, you know, like, maybe it doesn't look neat enough. And, you know, the people just walk by just sensing your horrible desperation and just like try to avert eye contact.